John Miller had always been a man of routine. Every Sunday without fail he visited the cemetery where his late wife, Sarah, rested. It had been 2 long years since the day she was taken from him in a tragic car accident, a day that changed everything. The vibrant life they once shared as a couple now felt like a distant memory, replaced by an emptiness that gnawed at him daily. The cemetery was quiet on this particular evening, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Shadows stretched across the rows of headstones, and the air carried a crispness that hinted at autumn's approach. John walked slowly along the familiar path, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. His steps were heavy with sorrow, each one echoing faintly against the stillness of the place. He stopped when he reached Sarah's grave, just as he always did. Her name was engraved neatly on the marble stone: Sarah Miller, beloved wife. Beneath it was a small inscription they had chosen together before her passing: forever in our hearts. For a while, John simply stood there staring at the words etched into the cold stone. Memories flooded his mind. Her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, the warmth of her hand in his. Those memories were bittersweet now, bringing both comfort and pain. He knelt down beside the grave, brushing away some fallen leaves that had gathered around the base of the stone. "Hey, Sarah," he whispered softly, though no one could hear him except the wind rustling through the trees. "It's me again." He didn't know why he spoke to her every week. Maybe it was because talking to her made him feel closer to her, even if only for a moment. Or maybe it was because he hoped somewhere deep inside that she could somehow hear him. But tonight felt different. There was something in the air, an uneasiness he couldn't quite explain. Normally the cemetery was peaceful, almost serene, but today it seemed off. As John lingered, unwilling to leave just yet, he heard it, a sound so unexpected that it made him freeze mid-breath. At first, he thought it might be his imagination, playing tricks on him. After all, cemeteries weren't exactly known for being lively places. But then it came again, clearer this time. It was the unmistakable sound of a child crying. His heart skipped a beat. Who would bring a child to a cemetery at this hour? And why would anyone let them cry alone? Looking around, John saw no one. The cemetery was deserted, save for himself, and the endless rows of graves stretching out in every direction. Still, the crying persisted, growing louder and more desperate with each passing second. It wasn't far away. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere very close, perhaps even right next to Sarah's grave. A shiver ran down John's spine. He tried to tell himself it was probably nothing, maybe just the wind carrying sounds from somewhere else. But the rational part of his brain struggled to make sense of what he was hearing. Wind didn't sound like a child sobbing. Determined to find the source of the noise, he took a cautious step forward, his shoes crunching softly against the gravel path. The crying grew louder as he moved closer to Sarah's headstone, until it felt like it was practically surrounding him. "Hello?" John called out hesitantly, his voice breaking slightly. "Is someone there?" There was no response, only the continued wailing of the child. Panic began to creep into his chest. Was someone hurt, lost, trapped? Whatever the reason, he knew he couldn't ignore it. Taking another step forward, he scanned the area carefully, looking for any sign of movement or life. That's when he noticed something strange. A patch of earth near the foot of Sarah's grave looked disturbed, as if someone had recently dug there. Fresh soil spilled over the edges, contrasting sharply with the dry, untouched ground around it. John's pulse quickened. What was going on here? Why would anyone dig near Sarah's grave? And what did it have to do with the mysterious crying? His mind raced with possibilities, none of which made much sense. Yet, despite the fear bubbling up inside him, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Something about the situation pulled at him, urging him to investigate further. Kneeling down beside the freshly turned soil, John examined it more closely. The dirt was loose, easy to move. Whoever or whatever had done this hadn't bothered to cover their tracks very well. As he stared at the ground, the crying grew louder, almost unbearable now. It was coming from directly beneath him. Without thinking, John reached out and scooped away a handful of soil, revealing more of what lay below. Each scoop brought a fresh wave of anxiety, but also a strange sense of determination. He needed to know what was causing the crying. He had to. With every clump of dirt he removed, the sound became clearer, more urgent. It was as though the child, or whatever it was pleading with him to keep going, to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface. By the time John realized how deeply he'd already dug, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the cemetery into shadow. Night was falling fast and the temperature dropped noticeably. Yet John barely noticed. All his focus was on the task at hand, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity that refused to let him stop. Little did he know, the answers he sought were buried deeper than he could have ever imagined, and they would change his life forever. The sound of the child's crying grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment, pulling John deeper into a whirlpool of confusion and dread. His hands trembled as he stared at the freshly disturbed patch of earth near Sarah's grave. It didn't make sense. Why would anyone dig there? And why now after all these years? The questions swirled in his mind like leaves caught in a storm. But one thing was certain. The cries were coming from beneath the ground. John hesitated for a moment, torn between logic and instinct. Logic told him to leave, to walk away and call someone, anyone, who might be better equipped to deal with this bizarre situation. But instinct, that primal part of him that refused to ignore the desperate plea of a child, urged him to keep going. Something about the sound tugged at his heartstrings, stirring emotions he hadn't felt since Sarah's passing. He couldn't turn his back on it. Not now. Taking a deep breath, John scanned the area around him once more, hoping against hope to see another person nearby who could explain what was happening. But the cemetery remained eerily silent, save for the haunting cries echoing through the air. Shadows lengthened as twilight gave way to night, and the first stars began to twinkle, faintly above. The cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. John felt completely alone, yet the presence of the crying child seemed almost tangible, as if it were right beside him pleading for help. Determined to get to the bottom of things, John stood up and looked around for something he could use to dig. His eyes landed on a small gardening spade leaning against a nearby tree, a tool left behind by the cemetery caretaker, no doubt meant for trimming overgrown grass or tidying flower beds. Without wasting another second, John grabbed the spade and returned to the spot where the soil had been disturbed. The cries continued unabated, growing sharper and more urgent with every scoop of dirt he removed. Each strike of the spade sent shivers down his spine, not just because of the eerie circumstances, but also because of the weight of what he might uncover. What if it wasn't a child at all? What if it was something else entirely? The thought made his stomach churn, but he pushed it aside. Whatever it was, he needed to know. Ignorance wouldn't bring him peace. Not tonight. As John dug deeper, beads of sweat formed on his forehead despite the chill in the air. His arms burned from the effort and his breathing grew labored, but he didn't stop. The soil was loose and easy to move, which only added to the strangeness of the situation. Whoever, or whatever, had dug here before him hadn't gone very far below the surface. With each layer of dirt he cleared away, the cries became clearer as though they were getting closer. They weren't muffled anymore. They sounded raw and real, full of anguish and fear. "Hold on," John muttered under his breath, half expecting the child to respond. "I'm coming." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was to reassure himself as much as whoever, or whatever, he was trying to reach. Either way, the words felt hollow in the vast emptiness of the cemetery. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and desperation. The spade clinked against something solid after several minutes of digging. Startled, John paused and leaned forward, brushing away the remaining dirt with his hands. Beneath the surface lay a wooden box, its edges worn and splintered with age. It looked old, almost ancient, yet it had clearly been placed here recently. John's heart raced, As he stared at the box, unsure of what to do next, his mind conjured up countless possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was it some kind of prank? A cruel joke played by vandals? Or was it something far darker, something he couldn't even begin to comprehend? The cries had stopped, now replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on him like a heavy blanket. For a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own ragged breathing. Summoning his courage, John reached out and grabbed the box, lifting it carefully out of the hole. It was lighter than he expected, and the wood creaked slightly under his grip. Dust clung to its surface, making it difficult to see any markings or details. Setting it down gently on the ground, John wiped his palms on his jeans and took a step back, studying it warily. The silence was deafening now, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl somewhere in the trees. "What are you?" John whispered, aloud, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers hovered uncertainly over the lid of the box. Part of him wanted to open it immediately, driven by curiosity and the need for answers. But another part, the rational, cautious side, warned him to tread carefully. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this situation made sense. Yet despite the warning bells ringing in his head, John knew he couldn't leave without finding out what was inside. Slowly, deliberately, he pried the lid open. At first glance, the contents of the box appeared unremarkable. A simple tape recorder, its plastic casing yellowed with age. A tiny red light blinked weakly on its side, indicating that it still held power. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed and brittle. John picked up the note first, unfolding it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized the loops and curves of her letters, the same ones he'd seen countless times in grocery lists and love notes she used to leave for him. "Dear John," the note began, and just those two words were enough to bring tears to his eyes. How many times had she started letters to him with those exact words? How many memories flooded back at the sight of her familiar script? Blinking rapidly to clear his vision, John forced himself to read on. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and our child is trying to reach you." John froze, the world around him seeming to tilt on its axis. Child? What child? He and Sarah had never discussed having children, at least not seriously. They'd always planned to wait until their careers were more stable, until they felt ready for such a monumental responsibility. But as he reread the sentence, realization dawned on him. Sarah must have been pregnant when she died. Why hadn't she told him? Did she think he wouldn't understand? Or had she been protecting him from the pain of knowing? Before he could process the implications of the note, John turned his attention to the tape recorder. Its blinking light seemed to beckon him, urging him to press play. Hesitant but unable to resist, he pressed the button. Static crackled briefly before Sarah's voice filled the air, soft and warm as though she were standing right beside him. "John," she began, her tone tinged with both sadness and affection. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. And I'm so sorry for leaving you. There's so much I wish I could say, so much I wish I could explain. But most of all, I want you to know how much I love you and how grateful I am for every moment we shared." Her voice broke slightly, and John had to fight back tears. He could picture her perfectly in his mind. Her gentle smile, the way she tilted her head when she spoke, the kindness that radiated from her very being. Listening to her now, even through the crackle of an old recording, felt like a gift and a curse all at once. "But there's something else, John," Sarah continued, her voice growing firmer. "Something I kept hidden from you because I didn't want to burden you. I was pregnant when the accident happened. I didn't tell you because I was scared. Scared of losing the baby. Scared of disappointing you. Scared of everything falling apart. But now, if you're hearing this, it means our child is reaching out to you. Please don't be afraid. Don't shut them out. They need you, John. We both do." The recording ended abruptly, leaving John sitting in stunned silence. The weight of Sarah's words settled over him like a heavy cloak, suffocating and comforting, all at once. She had been pregnant. They had been expecting a child, a future neither of them got to experience together. And now somehow that child was calling out to him from beyond the grave. John sat there for what felt like hours, clutching the tape recorder in his hands as tears streamed down his face. The cemetery was silent once again, the earlier cries, replaced by the steady rhythm of his own sobs. In that moment, he realized that grief wasn't something you ever truly moved past. It was something you carried with you, forever shaping who you were. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to define him anymore. The weight of Sarah's words hung heavily in the air, pressing down on John like a storm cloud that refused to break. He sat motionless, the tape recorder still clutched tightly in his hands, replaying her voice over and over in his mind. Each syllable was etched into his memory now. Her soft tone, the quiver in her voice as she spoke of their unborn child, the raw honesty that had always been so uniquely her. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, as though he were caught between two worlds, the one he lived in and the one Sarah had left behind. For a long time, John didn't move. The cold night air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His thoughts raced faster than they ever had before, tumbling over each other in a chaotic whirlwind. How could this be real? How could Sarah have kept something so monumental, a pregnancy, from him? And yet, deep down, he understood why she might have done it. She'd always been selfless, putting others' needs ahead of her own. If she thought telling him would cause him pain or worry, she would have shielded him from it without hesitation. That was just who she was. But what about the crying? What about the box buried near her grave? None of it made sense. Was this some kind of cosmic message, a way for Sarah to reach out to him from beyond death, or was there something more earthly at play here? The questions swirled endlessly in his mind, leaving him no closer to answers. All he knew for certain was that he couldn't leave, not yet. Not until he understood what was happening. Slowly, John stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans with trembling hands. The tape recorder was still warm from its faint blinking light, and he slipped it carefully into his coat pocket, unwilling to let it out of his sight. The wooden box lay open on the ground beside him, its secret revealed, but far from explained. As he stared at it, a new thought occurred to him. Why bury it here next to Sarah's grave? Who had placed it there? And how had they known where to find him? A chill ran down his spine as he considered the possibilities. Could someone else know about Sarah's pregnancy? Someone close to her, perhaps? Or worse, was this some twisted prank designed to torment him further? The idea sent anger surging through his veins, but he quickly pushed it aside. No, that didn't feel right. This wasn't cruelty. It was connection. Whoever, or whatever, had led him to this moment wanted him to hear Sarah's message, to understand the truth she'd hidden from him. They wanted him to remember. John glanced around the cemetery again, half expecting to see someone watching him from the shadows. But the rows of headstones remained silent witnesses, their inscriptions glowing faintly under the moonlight. The only sound was the distant rustle of leaves carried by a breeze that seemed colder now than it had been moments ago. He was alone, utterly and completely. But somehow, he didn't feel that way. It was as if Sarah were standing beside him, her presence lingering in the air, guiding him forward. With a deep breath, John knelt back down beside the hole he'd dug. The wooden box was empty now, save for the faint scent of aged wood and dust. He stared at it for a moment, then reached out and touched its surface lightly, as though hoping it might offer some clue he'd missed before. But it was just an ordinary box. Nothing magical or mysterious about it. Still, the fact that it had been buried here so deliberately gnawed at him. There had to be a reason, something bigger than he could currently comprehend. His gaze shifted to the ground beneath him, to the freshly turned earth where the cries had first drawn him in. What if there was more? What if the box wasn't the end of the mystery but merely the beginning? The thought sent a fresh wave of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Without giving himself time to second guess, John grabbed the gardening spade once more and began digging again, deeper this time. The soil was loose and easy to move, and within minutes, he'd widened the hole significantly. As he worked, his mind drifted back to Sarah. He remembered the last conversation they'd had before her accident, the way she'd smiled at him. Across the dinner table, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she teased him about his inability to cook anything edible. "You'll figure it out someday," she'd said with a laugh, her voice full of confidence. "Maybe when I'm not around to save you." At the time, he'd rolled his eyes and joked back, never imagining those words would take on such haunting significance. Now kneeling in the dirt beside her grave, John wished desperately that he could turn back time. He would tell her everything he'd never gotten the chance to say, that he loved her more than words could express, that she was the center of his universe, that he couldn't imagine life without her. But most of all, he would ask her about the child, about the future they'd dreamed of but never reached. Did she know? Had she suspected? Was that why she'd recorded the message? To prepare him for this moment? The spade struck something, solid again, jolting John out of his reverie. Heart pounding, he set the tool aside and used his hands to clear away the remaining dirt. Beneath the surface lay another object, a small, weathered book bound in faded leather. Its cover was cracked and worn, the edges frayed with age. Carefully, John lifted it from the ground and brushed off the clinging soil. It was heavier than it looked, its pages dense with writing. Flipping it open, he discovered that it was a journal, its pages filled with Sarah's familiar handwriting. Each entry was dated, spanning several months leading up to her death. Some were short and fragmented, while others stretched across multiple pages detailing her hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. John flipped through them slowly, his heart aching with every word he read. In one entry, she wrote about the day she found out she was pregnant, how she'd cried tears of joy and terror all at once, unsure of how to process the news. In another, she confessed her guilt over keeping it a secret from John, afraid of burdening him with worries about her health. "I wish I could tell him," she wrote in shaky letters near the end of the journal. "I wish I could share this, part of me, with him. But I can't risk losing him. Not now, not like this. If something happens to me, I hope he'll forgive me. I hope he'll understand." Tears blurred John's vision as he closed the journal, clutching it to his chest, like a lifeline. Everything clicked into place now. The pregnancy, the hidden messages, the cries that had drawn him here. Sarah hadn't abandoned him. She'd done everything she could to ensure he wouldn't forget her, or the child they'd lost together. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a story of love, sacrifice, and unfinished business. Standing up, John looked around the cemetery one last time. The stars above twinkled faintly, casting their pale light over the rows of graves. For the first time in years, he didn't feel weighed down by grief. Instead, he felt connected. To Sarah, to the child they'd never met, and to the life they'd shared, however brief it had been. Whatever uncertainty lay ahead, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't face it alone. Sarah had given him the tools to heal, to honor their past while finding a way to move forward. And maybe, just maybe, the cries he'd heard weren't meant to haunt him. Maybe they were a reminder, a call to embrace the love that still lingered, even in the face of loss. The journal felt heavy in John's hands, not because of its physical weight, but because of the emotions it carried. Each page was a window into Sarah's inner world, a place he thought he knew so well but now realized he had only glimpsed. As he flipped through the entries, he found himself transported back to moments they had shared, moments that now took on new meaning in light of what he'd discovered. It was as if Sarah were sitting beside him, whispering secrets she'd kept, locked away for far too long. John settled onto a nearby bench, the leather-bound book resting on his lap. The cemetery was quiet now, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. Shadows stretched across the ground like ghostly fingers, and the occasional rustle of leaves provided the only soundtrack to his solitude. Despite the eerie setting, John felt strangely at peace. For the first time since her death, he felt truly close to Sarah, not just as a memory frozen in time, but as a living, breathing presence guiding him toward understanding. He opened the journal to the first entry, dated several months before the accident. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate, each letter carefully formed as though she wanted to ensure her words would be understood. "Today I found out I'm pregnant," she began. "I don't know how to feel. Part of me is overjoyed. This is something we've talked about, something we've dreamed of. But another part of me is terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't give this baby the life it deserves?" Reading those lines hit John like a punch to the gut. He remembered that period vividly. Sarah had seemed distracted, quieter than usual, but he'd chalked it up to stress from work or some other minor issue. How could he have missed the signs? She must have been carrying such a heavy burden all on her own, afraid to share it with him for fear of adding to his worries. His chest tightened as guilt washed over him, but he forced himself to keep reading. This wasn't about blame, it was about understanding. In subsequent entries, Sarah poured out her heart, documenting every stage of her pregnancy journey. Some days, she wrote about the excitement of feeling the baby move inside her, describing the tiny flutters as like butterflies dancing. Other days, she confessed her fears about her health, about whether John would forgive her for keeping the secret, about whether their child would ever get to meet its father. "I wish I could tell him," she wrote in one particularly poignant entry. "But I'm scared of disappointing him, scared of ruining the happiness we've built together. Maybe someday when the timing is right." That phrase, "when the timing is right," echoed in John's mind long after he finished reading the sentence. Timing. It was ironic, really. Sarah had waited for the perfect moment to share her news, but fate had intervened, leaving them both robbed of the future they deserved. Yet even in her uncertainty, she had managed to leave behind pieces of herself, a trail of breadcrumbs meant to lead him to the truth. As John continued reading, he stumbled upon an entry that made his breath catch in his throat. Dated just days before the accident, it read, "I recorded a message today for John. If anything happens to me, I want him to hear my voice one last time. I want him to know how much I love him and how much I believe in him. Our child will need him, even if I'm not there to help. I hope he'll find strength in our memories, in the love we shared. I hope he'll forgive me." Tears blurred John's vision as he traced the words with his fingertips, imagining Sarah sitting alone in their home, speaking into the tape recorder with trembling hands. She had known, even then, that her time might be limited. And yet, instead of succumbing to despair, she had chosen to prepare him for the unimaginable. Her courage left him awestruck, humbling him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The final entry in the journal was brief, almost hurried. "Tomorrow I'm going to bury this journal near my favorite spot in the cemetery, the place where John and I used to sit and talk about everything and nothing. If he ever finds it, if he hears my message, I hope he knows that none of this was his fault. I hope he knows that our child loves him too, and that love doesn't end no matter what happens." Closing the journal, John sat in silence, letting the enormity of Sarah's sacrifice sink in. She had planned this, all of it. The box, the tape recorder, the journal, even the cries that had drawn him here. Somehow she had orchestrated it all, leaving behind a legacy of love and resilience that transcended death itself. It was as though she had reached across time and space to guide him through his darkest hour, reminding him that he wasn't alone. For a while, John simply sat there staring at the stars above. The night was cool, but the warmth of Sarah's presence enveloped him like a comforting embrace. He thought about the child they'd lost, their unborn son or daughter whose existence he had never known until tonight. The idea of mourning someone he'd never met felt overwhelming, yet somehow fitting. After all, wasn't grief just another form of love? Eventually, John stood up, clutching the journal tightly against his chest. He glanced back at Sarah's grave, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. In that moment, he realized something profound. Sarah hadn't left him. Not entirely. She lived on in the memories they'd shared, in the lessons she'd taught him, and in the child who had been taken too soon. Their family wasn't broken. It was incomplete, waiting for him to piece it back together in his own way. With renewed determination, John made his way back to the hole he dug earlier. Carefully, he placed the wooden box and the gardening spade back into the earth, covering them with soil until the ground looked undisturbed once more. Then, kneeling beside Sarah's headstone, he whispered softly, "Thank you." It wasn't enough. Nothing could ever be enough. But it was a start. A promise to honor her memory, to cherish the life they'd created together, and to carry their love forward into whatever lay ahead. As he walked away from the cemetery, the journal tucked safely under his arm, John felt a spark of hope flicker within him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years he felt ready to face it. And somewhere, in the vast expanse between life and death, Sarah smiled. The days that followed Sarah's revelation were a blur of emotions for John. Each morning he woke up with the journal resting on his bedside table, its worn leather cover staring back at him like an old friend who had returned after years apart. At first he hesitated to open it again, afraid that revisiting its pages might reopen wounds he wasn't ready to face. But as the sun rose higher in the sky and the house filled with silence, he found himself drawn to it, unable to resist the pull of Sarah's voice calling out from beyond the grave. Each entry brought him closer to her, not just as the woman he had loved and lost, but as a person grappling with fears, hopes, and dreams she had never fully shared with him. He read about her excitement over tiny kicks felt in the quiet moments of the night, her anxiety over doctor's appointments, and her determination to create a future for their child despite the uncertainty clouding her own health. Through her words, John saw a side of Sarah he hadn't known existed, a mother-to-be brimming with love and resolve, even as she battled doubt and fear. But it wasn't just her journey that captivated him. It was the way she wrote about him. In nearly every entry she mentioned John, how much she admired his strength, how grateful she was for the life they had built together, and how desperately she hoped he would forgive her for keeping such a monumental secret. "John will be an amazing father," she wrote in one passage. "He has so much love to give, and our baby will be lucky to have him. I just wish I could be there to see it." Those words hit John like a tidal wave, washing away the guilt and regret that had weighed him down for so long. For years he had carried the burden of believing he hadn't done enough, that somehow, if he'd been stronger or more attentive, he could have saved Sarah. But now, reading her unwavering faith in him, he realized she had never blamed him. If anything, she had trusted him implicitly, leaving behind pieces of herself so he could find his way forward without her. Determined to honor her memory, John began making changes in his life. He started small at first, tidying up the house they had once shared. It had fallen into disarray during his grief, cluttered with reminders of happier times he couldn't bear to confront. Now, though, he approached the task with purpose, sorting through photo albums, letters, and mementos they had collected over the years. Each item sparked a flood of memories, some bittersweet, others unexpectedly joyful. He smiled as he came across a Polaroid of them laughing at a roadside diner during a road trip, their faces smeared with ketchup and mustard. He chuckled softly, remembering how competitive they had been over who could eat their burger faster. As he worked, John also began thinking about ways to memorialize Sarah and the child they had lost. The idea came to him one evening while flipping through the journal, yet again. On one of the final pages, Sarah had written, "If anything happens to me, I want our baby to have a name. Something beautiful, something meaningful. Maybe Evelyn if it's a girl or Liam if it's a boy." Her choice of names struck him deeply. They were simple, timeless, and full of warmth, just like Sarah herself. Inspired, John decided to create a special memorial for them both. Over the next few weeks, he visited local craft stores, gathering materials to design a plaque he could place near Sarah's grave. He chose soft pastel colors, pinks and blues, and adorned it with delicate floral patterns reminiscent of the wildflowers Sarah used to pick on their hikes. At the center of the plaque, he inscribed two names, Sarah Miller and Evelyn Liam Miller. Beneath them, he added a short message, "Forever loved, forever missed." When the plaque was finished, John returned to the cemetery, carrying it carefully in his arms. The air was crisp and golden sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the ground. As he knelt beside Sarah's grave, he took a moment to look around. This place had always been sacred to them, a quiet retreat where they could escape the chaos of the world and simply be. Now it felt even more significant, a bridge connecting the living and the departed. With steady hands, John secured the plaque near the headstone, positioning it so it caught the light beautifully. Stepping back, he surveyed his work, feeling a sense of pride and closure wash over him. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever could be, but it was heartfelt, a testament to the love that still bound them together. "This is for you," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "For both of you." In the days that followed, John noticed subtle shifts within himself. The sharp edges of his grief softened, replaced by a gentle ache that reminded him of Sarah's presence rather than her absence. He began sleeping better, waking up with a renewed sense of purpose instead of dread. Even the simplest tasks, making coffee in the morning, walking to the mailbox, felt lighter somehow, as though he were carrying less weight on his shoulders. One afternoon, while browsing through old photos, John stumbled upon a picture of Sarah holding a bouquet of sunflowers. She looked radiant, her smile wide and genuine, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Something about the image inspired him. Later that week, he drove to a nearby nursery and bought several packets of sunflower seeds. When he got home, he planted them in the backyard, arranging them in a circle to form a makeshift garden. As he worked, he imagined Sarah standing beside him, offering advice and laughing at his clumsy attempts to dig straight rows. Over time, the sunflowers grew tall and vibrant, their golden petals reaching toward the sky like little bursts of sunshine. John spent hours tending to them, finding solace in the rhythmic motions of watering, weeding, and pruning. Each bloom felt like a tribute to Sarah's spirit, bright, resilient, and full of life. On sunny afternoons, he would sit among them, journal in hand, reading her entries aloud as though sharing them with her all over again. But perhaps the most profound change came when John started talking about Sarah openly. For years he had avoided mentioning her name, fearing that doing so would reopen wounds too painful to bear. Now, however, he found himself speaking about her freely, with friends, family, and even strangers who asked about the sunflower garden. He told them stories about her kindness, her humor, and her boundless optimism. He spoke about the child they had lost, too, sharing snippets from the journal and describing the names Sarah had chosen. With each conversation, he felt a little lighter, as though releasing pieces of his sorrow into the world and letting others help carry the load. It wasn't easy, not by any means, but slowly, steadily, John began rebuilding his life. He threw himself into volunteer work, helping organize community events and fundraisers for families affected by loss. He joined a support group for grieving parents, where he met others navigating similar journeys. Though their experiences varied, they shared a common thread, a desire to honor their loved ones while finding meaning in their pain. Through it all, John kept Sarah's journal close, turning to it whenever he needed guidance or comfort. Its pages became a kind of anchor, grounding him during moments of doubt or despair. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, he opened it to a random page and found an entry he hadn't noticed before. Dated shortly before her death, it read, "To my dearest John, wherever you are right now, please know this. You are stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and loved more than you can imagine. Keep going. Keep living. And remember, we're always with you." Tears welled in John's eyes as he closed the journal, clutching it tightly to his chest. He didn't need to hear her voice to know she was right. Somewhere, somehow, Sarah and their child were still with him, guiding him through the darkness and reminding him that love endures, even in the face of loss. Months passed and John's life began to take on a new rhythm, a delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the present. The sunflower garden in his backyard had grown into a vibrant sea of gold, swaying gently in the breeze like waves frozen in time. Each morning he would step outside with a cup of coffee in hand, watching as sunlight danced across the petals. It was a ritual that brought him peace, a quiet reminder of Sarah's enduring presence in his life. But it wasn't just about remembering her anymore. It was also about finding joy in the moments she couldn't be there to share. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves painted the ground in shades of amber and crimson, John decided to host a small gathering at his home. He invited close friends, family members, and even some acquaintances from the support group he'd joined. The idea came to him after noticing how isolated he'd become in the years following Sarah's death. Grief had a way of shrinking the world, pulling you inward until everything else faded into the background. Now, though, he wanted to expand that world again, not just for himself, but for others who might need connection as much as he once had. He spent the days leading up to the event preparing tirelessly, cleaning the house, baking cookies, and arranging chairs around the sunflower garden. He even placed a wooden bench near the flowers, positioning it so visitors could sit and admire their beauty. On the day of the gathering, he woke early to set out snacks and drinks, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would people come? Would they understand why this mattered so much to him? As the first guests arrived, John greeted them warmly, ushering them toward the garden. To his relief, everyone seemed genuinely touched by the space he had created. Friends marveled at the towering sunflowers, remarking on how they seemed to radiate warmth and light. Family members shared stories about Sarah, laughing through tears, as they recalled her infectious laugh and unwavering kindness. Even those who hadn't known her personally found themselves drawn to the atmosphere of love and remembrance that filled the air. At one point during the afternoon, John stood at the edge of the garden, surveying the scene before him. Children chased each other through the rows of flowers while adults chatted animatedly, plates of food balanced precariously in their hands. Laughter echoed through the yard, mingling with the rustle of leaves overhead. For the first time in years, John felt truly surrounded, not by emptiness but by community. It was a stark contrast to the lonely evenings he used to spend staring at Sarah's grave, wondering if he'd ever feel whole again. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink, John asked everyone to gather near the plaque he had installed beside Sarah's memorial stone. Holding a candle in one hand and Sarah's journal in the other, he took a deep breath and addressed the group. "I want to thank all of you for being here today," he began, his voice steady, despite the lump forming in his throat. "This isn't just a garden. It's a tribute to someone who meant more to me than words can express, someone who taught me what it means to love deeply, to hope fiercely, and to keep going even when the road ahead feels impossible." He paused, glancing down at the journal in his hands. Before she passed, Sarah left behind something special, a message for me and for anyone willing to listen. She wanted us to know that love doesn't end when someone leaves us. Instead, it transforms. It becomes part of who we are, shaping the way we see the world and interact with others. John opened the journal to a page he had bookmarked earlier, reading aloud an excerpt he hoped would resonate with his guests. "Life is messy and unpredictable," Sarah had written, "but it's also beautiful. Don't let fear hold you back from living fully, loving openly, and finding joy wherever you can." As he closed the journal, applause erupted from the crowd, followed by murmurs of agreement and admiration. Several people wiped away tears, moved not only by Sarah's words but also by the courage John had shown in sharing them. Afterward, the mood shifted slightly, becoming lighter and more celebratory. Music played softly in the background as people lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of the gathering. A few children picked fallen sunflower petals, weaving them into makeshift crowns, while others snapped photos of the garden to preserve the memory. One woman approached John with a smile, thanking him for creating such a meaningful space. "You've given us all a gift," she said sincerely. "A reminder that even in loss, there's still beauty to be found." Her words stayed with John, long after the last guest departed, leaving behind empty plates and lingering laughter. That night, as he sat alone under the stars, he realized how far he had come since that fateful evening in the cemetery. Back then he had been lost, adrift in a sea of grief with no clear direction. Now, though, he felt anchored, tethered to something greater than himself. Sarah's love had guided him through the darkness, teaching him that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering and carrying forward the lessons learned along the way. Over the following weeks, John continued to nurture the connections he had rekindled during the gathering. He reached out to old friends, inviting them over for dinner or coffee. He volunteered regularly at the community center, organizing events and workshops aimed at supporting families navigating similar losses. And every Sunday, without fail, he visited Sarah's grave, bringing fresh sunflowers to place beside her headstone. Each trip felt less like a pilgrimage and more like a conversation, a chance to update her on his progress, share stories about their child, and remind her that she was never far from his thoughts. One chilly winter morning, as frost blanketed, the ground and the sunflowers stood dormant beneath layers of snow, John received an unexpected letter in the mail. The envelope bore no return address, but something about its handwriting, the careful loops and curves, felt familiar. His heart raced as he opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper inside. Written in Sarah's unmistakable script were 3 simple words: "I'm proud of you." Tears streamed down John's face as he clutched the note to his chest, overwhelmed by the sense of closure it brought. He didn't question how or why the letter had arrived. It didn't matter. What mattered was the message itself, a final affirmation that Sarah's love transcended time and space, reaching him whenever he needed it most. From that day forward, John carried those words with him wherever he went, letting them guide him through life's challenges and triumphs alike. Though he missed Sarah terribly, he no longer felt consumed by her absence. Instead, he embraced the legacy she had left behind, a legacy of love, resilience, and hope. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispered through the trees, he swore he could hear laughter echoing in the distance, a gentle reminder that, somewhere beyond the veil, Sarah and their child were watching over him, smiling.